The Women's Helping Hands Initiative is the name of the NGO I run, and it started in 2006. But years before 2006, I started working with street children in Lagos, street boys. They're called area boys. Mm-hmm. And for 10 years, I was in their lair every week, sometimes twice, thrice a week. It led me to write many years later a book called They Call Me Mama. They Call Me Mama is just anecdotes on my experiences under the bridge with those who are hopeless and lost and abandoned, and the only thing I could take to them was love. And that was all they needed. They were dirty, they were smelly, they were rough, they were tough, but all they wanted was just someone to love. And while under the bridge, I realized that we had a steady stream of young boys that would leave home and live on the streets, literally. And it occurred to me that if only their mothers were better suited to help them, perhaps we wouldn't have this steady stream. And really it was the boys that led me to start the Women's Helping Hands Initiative, because I knew if their mothers knew better, they would do better. Now, 95% of them were from broken homes. The father had moved on to another wife who didn't want to see them, and the mothers had moved on to another husband who didn't want to see them. And so the safest place for them was out of the house. And they were like a pack of wolves, very committed. It was a very tight bond, tight family in those very dangerous places. But for me, it was the safest place because I loved them and they loved me. And that was the safest place for me in the city of Lagos. And my car was the most secure car that couldn't have been stolen because you couldn't live to tell the tale if they caught you with Mama's car. And they called me Mama. And so they literally led me to working with women and girls. I met a few girls in those circumstances that were girlfriends to the men under the bridge. There was one particularly, she was probably about 15 or 16. And over years, she had 3 boys for one of the young men under the bridge. And she had nothing. We had to pay for her antenatal, we had to monitor her, and she kept coming back and having more children. And so this is what formed the basis of going into working with women. And of course I worked with prostitutes and literally everyone that needed it. Now we have, I'll just pass this round if you don't mind, because it would help my conversations. This is the first quarter of our newsletter. We do a quarterly newsletter. This is from the first quarter, but if you look at the back, I'll just speak from the back. These are the 16 different things that we do, and we're very happy for the support we have from UNFPA. We've trained out-of-school girls in Lagos, I think 270 at some point, and we've had a lot of interventions with UNFPA on women's health and empowering women to make them more financially stable. We had a side talk, Ms. Mueller and I, at that function, because even then, at the highest levels of society, even then we were pointing out the discrepancies when it comes to gender. We could identify it, and for that reason I'm glad you have chosen to work in Nigeria, but chosen to work with Nigerians in Nigeria, because there's a lot of culture and nuances that may actually be beyond your scope because you're not from here and you cannot pick up on it. So I admire the fact that you've chosen to work in Nigeria but with Nigerians, because then you can be much more effective. As Ms. Mueller said, we run 2 shelters in Lagos, and our shelters are both they're for the abused, domestic violence, sexual abuse, and trafficking. So it's not a homeless shelter. It's a shelter for those who have had the troubles. So we have a 150-bed facility in one place and a 100-bed facility in the other. So we have 250 beds total in Lagos, and thankfully you visited one of them. Each one has nursing care. We have a nurse 24 hours. We have a hall in each one where they gather. We have a skills acquisition room in each one. And that's just two of the things we do. The shelter is very dear to my heart, and we've run the shelter now for over 10 years, which is way before we got here. And the organization started in 2006, and my husband became VP in 2015. Now, being in the shelter, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes to watch just a few clips on some of the things we do. Being in the shelter and in the company of those that have been through the most harrowing experiences ever it just, I don't know the words, it changes one's life. It just changes your life. I've had to look into the eyes here of a 3-year-old that was brought here, that was being molested by her father, and she was brought here. I've had to look into the eyes of a young girl whose mother had her before she got married. And when her mother eventually got married, she left her daughter with her father, which is the daughter's grandfather. And this girl was brought to us at about 17, raped by the grandfather and pregnant by the grandfather. And she cried throughout the pregnancy, and so did everyone else. When you realize that people are in such dire straits and such difficult circumstances, it's difficult to sit back and nibble on chicken drumsticks when you know that if you weren't there, where would they go? They'll be stuck. They'll be stuck. We've had groups of trafficked girls from Mali, from Burkina Faso, from Dubai, from name it. If we weren't there, where would they go? Some of them were trafficked by their own family. The culture of having domestic workers, sometimes younger than the age of acceptance, the age of consent, probably started as a sort of mentoring thing that, there's someone who's educated in the community and, the parents aren't educated, so they want their children to live in those circumstances so they can learn better and, be better educated, better enlightened. But sometimes they're thrust into slavery. They're thrust into slavery. People pay for a year to have a domestic worker. You're not renting a house or a car. So they're indentured. They can't leave. They can't go back home. Their parents have collected money, and their parents need the money to fend for the other siblings. So we're in a situation where the issues are a lot. I'm sure there's homelessness all over the world, but what is facing me is my own community. And this is the passion that drives a lot of the work we do at the Women's Helping Hands. So the shelter is there. Our shelter, we accept people for 6 weeks to 3 months. Our shelter is free. We don't collect a fee for the shelter. We depend on donations and such like. We have, as Ms. Mueller knows, they'll be fed, they'll be housed, they'll be clothed, and they'll be trained. I remember a lady who came to us, and she had a few children, I think about 3 or 4, and she had a domestic violence situation. And she came with the clothes on her back, and so did the children. So we taught her how to make a drink called Zobo. And while at the shelter, she would step out and go to schools and sell her wares. And by the time she left the shelter, this was many years ago, she'd saved 35,000 naira, which was enough at the time for her to get a room and move her family in there. So without financial ability, the people are stuck. So that takes us from the shelter to the programs that are empowerment programs. And we have two of those, and that's Step Up and Project Ayodele. So Step Up and Project Ayodele trains in skills that people can acquire quickly without a lot of education. And they're practical courses that you watch and copy, and you can start business without a lot of capital. We love parties. So there's one that's the party support services. So if you can do the decorations and blow the balloons and make the little orders, the snacks and the small chops and do the flower arrangements, you'll be fine. The birthdays and baby namings and things like that and weddings. And those are the sort of things we teach, such that after the training, they get a certificate of participation. And for many of them, that's the difference between life and death. That's the difference between having and not having. So those are the two programs. I believe Step Up, we've trained over 20,000 in our time. UNFPA has been very kind to have supported a fair number. We'll find out how many, but I remember the 270 schoolgirls, out of school girls, that were trained in Lagos. Yes. We have the advocacy campaigns. I know you're also strong on advocacy. The Precious and Knock Knock, and we'll look at a few clips on that. We have Precious, Knock Knock, and Hope advocacy campaigns, where the precious is girls and women are precious. And this is taken to schools, to communities, and we're very happy to bring the message to any group, whether it's in your office, in your neighborhood association meeting, your town hall meetings, wherever people gather. In the marketplace, we're very happy to bring our leaflets and show our little clips and answer questions. And we've been doing this for an unbelievable amount of time. The Women Working for Women is when we gather organizations that are doing one thing or the other. We have a shelter. There's some people that do free medical care, some do free legal aid, and then we gather everyone so we can offer holistic help. This is important because we may have a few names of NGOs, but they're not effective. So this actually showcases those that have been proven. And then if I have a shelter and you can give me free legal aid, then I'll take it. But you've got free legal aid and you haven't got a shelter, then you can come to me. So that's what Women Working for Women is. We haven't had that in a while, but I'm trusting we will sometime soon. Okay, I'll go to number 11 or 10. 10 is care training. Care training is we train teachers to identify abuse, and then they become our care ambassadors. So we have a whole community of care ambassadors across a few states in the nation that we've trained and we keep training to identify abuse in the students. So they're able to identify it, and then they know what to do, where to call, who to go to, and we are also available. The egg distribution started off as milk. We gave milk to 0 to 5 year olds. But after the COVID pandemic, we stopped it for a season and we changed it to eggs. So if a child can get a glass of milk a day, the areas where there's malnutrition. But now 0 to 5 year olds can have an egg a day, it helps their nutrition. So that's what that is. And I think we're doing 500 children now, and they get eggs every week. Umi, how many children are we giving eggs now? 540. We have in Nasarawa, in Abeokuta, in Ikenne, and Ajura. Yes, Ajura village. So we have 4 locations where we give 540 now, 540 now. In 5 locations where we give them eggs every week on Tuesdays. So they come in and get their eggs. So even if they can't afford beef or chicken or fish, they can boil an egg and the child can have it with a meal. The seniors monthly meeting is in one place, and that just gathers the 60-plus-year-olds, and they're lonely, and and they're needy, they're retired, they're not as financially stable as they used to, and we're able to reach them that way. The banks, we have the food bank, book bank, and clothes bank, but we don't keep them. We bank them when we are taking them out. So if we're taking food to our jewelry village, we'll ask for food and take it, and that's it. We don't warehouse it. We don't keep it. The only place I guess we warehouse clothes a bit is in the shelters, because if you come in with the clothes on your back, and your children also, we have clothes that they can just go into a room and pick up enough for themselves. Then the bookshelf. This is just what it says, a bookshelf in 10 locations, and people can come in and read the books for free. After school clubs, we have the football club, Prince's Football Club for the boys, and Princesses Football Club for the girls, and gardening clubs. I think I've said a lot, but I think we'll watch a few little clips, and then that would probably help to explain a bit more.